Hey, Shaun, how you doing? Welcome to the Living Undeterred show.
Thank you, Jeff. It's my pleasure to be with you.
We were talking before we jumped on air, and just how exciting life can be when we lean into new things that and you're just a little older than me, but you're
Well,
embracing things.
you're kind to use the word little. I think it's almost
Yeah.
20 years, but anyway.
But the fact you're just taking on things that people at your age are looking at, sitting on a beach somewhere and sipping pina
Right,
coladas or playing golf
right,
with their lawyer friends, which fits well for
right.
you.
Yeah,
It's just, I don't know. There's something about learning that I'm
right,
addicted to at 56 that it's exciting. A lot of my friends look at me and they're like, why don't you slow down, Jeff? I'm like, no,
right.
there's so much for me to learn. So we have a lot to talk about. I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Well,
You
thank
and
you.
I had our first kind of just a spontaneous conversation that ended up being over an hour. And I think we both had to shut it off because we
Right.
just went down so many interesting holes and roads. And I'm really excited to have you on the show. There's certain things that you do that are really close to my heart that actually have kind of exposed me to some areas of this opioid crisis we have in this country that I never
Right.
really thought about, that now you're kind of plunged into. But first, a little bit about Shaun, where you're from, and a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm from a little farm town about an hour west of Spokane called Ritzville, kind of an interesting name. Anyway, my dad was a country lawyer, practiced there for 53 years. He'd been born and raised there. So I spent my first 18 years there, and then went to the University of Washington, and sort of had two goals in life at that time. And one was not to come back to Eastern Washington, and the other was not to be a lawyer because everybody in my family was a lawyer. But anyway, I ended up getting a physics degree at the University of Washington, working as an engineer for a while in Southern California. Met my wife in 1974, and spent for a few years back on the East Coast in Connecticut, and then after my mom passed away, decided to go to law school and went to the University of Oregon. Graduated in '79, and
Hmm.
I practiced for 44 years here in Spokane as a corporate lawyer, and
Okay.
still am a partner with a firm by the name of Lee and Hayes. We're in 7 cities around the country, but we're based headquartered here in Spokane.
Okay. And now you are doing something, different, I guess is a good way to term it. But how did you end up? And Maddie's Place is just an, absolutely amazing organization.
Yeah,
I
well,
really want to have you talk about. Um, I don't know. I maybe explain a little bit about what Maddie's Place does, but what kind of got you to be in this area of this opioid crisis that we have?
yeah. So we have here in Spokane. It's the fourth such facility in the country. It's called a pediatric transitional care facility,
Hmm.
and there's one called Lily's Place in Huntington, West Virginia. Another called Bridget's Path in Kettering, Ohio. Another called Hushabye in Phoenix, and then the fourth is Maddie's Place here in Spokane, Washington. And we, like these other clinics, provide nurturing medical care for infants that are born suffering from dependency on drugs. And it can be opioids, it can be non opioids. And so that is really our focus. How I got interested in this is that I've known a woman by the name of Tricia Hughes since 1999, and she and her husband had moved out here from Chicago. He's actually become the senior pastor of the church that I attend. But I knew at the time they came out that she was an acute care nurse and had a special love for children. She and her husband have 4 biological children of their own. Um, but about 2003, 2004, I ran for Congress. And every time I ran into Tricia, she was tugging on my shirt saying, "If when you win." She was very optimistic. I ended up getting beat badly, but anyway, she said, when you win, we've got to do something about these babies that are born dependent on drugs. It's just everywhere, and it's just a mess in the foster care system, and it's just incredible what's going on. So I watched Trisha during the early 2000s and past 2010. She and her husband ended up taking care of, I suppose over the last 20 years, they've taken care of 20 to 25 of these babies.
Hmm.
And I watched her and her husband adopt 5 of these babies, so they have 9 children. The third child is a
Hmm.
little baby girl named Maddie, who that wasn't her name. I don't think she had a name when they found her 18 days on the street here in Spokane, withdrawing from heroin.
Wow.
And the Child Protective Services got involved. Police took her up to Sacred Heart Hospital, which is our major hospital system here in Spokane. And she had already by 2008 developed the kind of the nickname as the baby lady here in Spokane to take care of these especially fragile babies. So after she was in the NIC unit for a little bit, in fact, they may have contacted her even right away when when Maddie came into the hospital. But Tricia literally wore her Maddie in a front pack for several
Hmm.
months as she went through withdrawal. And it was the worst heroin withdrawal she'd ever seen. And so we've named now that she's a beautiful 14-year-old girl, and very normal, and just a teenager. And you never know what she was exposed to and what her background was. She's been adopted by Carrie and Tricia Hughes, and she's a 14-year-old girl. So we've named this venture Maddie's Place in honor of her. But
Does
then
she know
kind of,
her past? Does she
yeah,
know?
she's very, very familiar
Okay.
with it. Yeah, she's very
Okay.
familiar with it. In fact, she's being requested to start talking in high school environments now
That's
about her
great.
background, to start sharing, because it's so
That's great.
prevalent and everything. So that's going to be a whole nother part of where this could go.
What kind of numbers are we looking at, Sean? I mean, how many
So
babies like this are born?
the numbers are incredible. Nationally, the statistics are somewhere between 10 and 15% of all live births are um, babies, infants that are born dependent on
Hmm.
some substance. And that would include opioids, meth,
Alcohol?
and then if you start adding alcohol, I think the numbers even grow bigger.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of clarity on our visibility on these numbers, quite frankly. We have about 6,000 live births here at the 4 major hospitals in Spokane, Washington. And if you take that 15% number, we're probably at 900, but we don't know, and this could be hyperbole, but we're concerned that the numbers in Spokane could be well over 2,000, between 2,000 and 3,000 of our 6,000 live births. We're not doing regular mandatory urine analysis or cord analysis of everyone that's coming in and all the babies that are being born. So, and a lot of these babies don't even manifest any withdrawal symptoms until after they've been discharged from the hospital, which is typically 4 to 5 days. Even if they
That's
think there's been some drug exposure, they're usually put out into the community within the first week. And some drugs don't even manifest themselves until after they've been discharged. Like meth, for example, doesn't show up for a few weeks.
hmm.
So we if you look at other numbers, if you look at the opioid crisis, generally, it's estimated over 800,000 adult women are victims of substance use disorder. And of that demographic, and which is interesting, almost 65% of adults that are misusing opioids are women, which is
Right.
interesting. I almost would have thought it would have been men, or at least 50-50, but for some reasons, it's almost 2-to-1 that it's impacting women.
Hmm.
And within that group of women, the largest demographic are ages 18 to 34, which are the birthing years.
Right.
So anyway, it was about 2017 that Tricia got 5 folks, or about 25 folks together in Spokane from different disciplines. I was the token lawyer, but there was a neonatologist and some social workers, some nurses, um, people in sort of the health services area, and so that's kind of when I started really working with Tricia, and we incorporated Maddie's Place and got our 501c3 status in 2018. Bought a facility and started raising money right when the pandemic broke, which was interesting because we did most of our fundraising on Zoom. Bought a
Hmm.
12,000 square foot facility that had been used for 20 years to house abused children here in Spokane. Unfortunately, the need for that is quadruple, so they built a $35 million facility, and we bought their old facility for $1.25 million, and then we spent a year plus remodeling it, And then we opened for services on October 3rd, just a little over 3 months ago.
I'm trying to remember, how did we cross paths?
So Deborah Vitnick, I
Oh, that's
think
right. Yeah. Okay. I was just sitting here
she,
thinking now, I can't
yeah,
remember. Yeah, because Deborah actually she was on my podcast. It's crazy because I know so many people and I forget where I met everybody because everyone kind of blurs together. But yeah, Deborah's awesome. I watched, got to see the documentary that she put together, which really opened my eyes about the women's, uh, issue with the opioid epidemic and how they kind of got set aside because it became kind of a male dominated or an
yep,
ethnic type issue for a long time, and women just kind of got forgotten about. And so this documentary kind of brings that back to the forefront to have these conversations that, it's easy to get distracted in certain aspects of this epidemic, but this women's issue, and then you go down to the babies. This is a big deal. And it's something that I think a lot of people in these advocates out there, myself included, just really aren't that familiar with, the prevalence of the issue, but what are some of the solutions and how can we start to right this ship? And so these babies, aren't being born like this,
right.
and B, if they are, what are the best ways that we can treat them so they have the best chances of having healthy lives?
Right. And I think it's helpful to have a little more context of the problem. I mean, it's a lot more fun and hopeful to talk about the solution, but
Yeah.
you really appreciate to really build the fire under folks. And I'm preaching to the choir on this one with you, Jeff. You need to see how bad this is
Mm.
and the impact that it's having on society. So a few other statistics that I think are helpful. I mean, if we think just in Spokane alone, our population in the county is around 550,000, something like that. And if you let's just say that it's 1,000 a year that we're faced
Hmm.
with, we think it could be 2,000 a year. Unfortunately, Spokane's been designated by the Drug Enforcement Agency as one of 11 cities in the United States in crisis due to fentanyl.
Mm.
So of our first 11 babies that came in, 10 were exposed to fentanyl.
Mm.
Many of them are polysubstance, so several different drugs in addition to fentanyl. But let's say it's just say it's 1,000 babies a year over the last 20 years. That's 20,000 humans that have come out of the system just here in Spokane alone. And
Wow.
the statistics for these kids are just horrible. If they don't get the right treatment during the first 90 days of life and really learn to bond and really learn to attach, it's just a disaster. So many go into the foster care system, and the average one of these babies, they're called NAS babies, NAS for neonatal abstinence syndrome, is
Mm.
what we're
Right.
treating. The average NAS baby is in 7 foster homes before they're 2 years old.
Oh my Lord. Wow.
When you look at the statistics, over
Before they're
85%
two.
before they're 2, so they've never been able to bond or attach
Yeah, and that's
because
such a key part of
it's
human
all
interact.
life.
Yeah,
It's
it
all life.
is. It
So if
is.
you look at the statistics, and then we'll get into the hopeful stuff and the solution.
Wow.
But if you look at 85% of girls that are born as a NAS baby will have out of wedlock pregnancies while they're using drugs before they're 18. So the cycle just
85%.
85%.
So they
Over
just
80
repeat, the cycle just kind of
just
keeps
totally
repeating.
repeats. It just
Right.
totally repeats.
Yep.
The average mom will have several of these babies, not just one. And I've heard as high as 7, but I haven't been able to back that up. But we've already treated 14 babies since we opened and had 7 moms here, all of whom were homeless, by the way. And we've had one mom this was her 4th baby that was dependent on drugs. The other 3 had been taken away. And then another mom, this was her 5th baby. And so we're not doing anything to stop this cycle.
Where are the
80%.
dads? Are they anywhere in this picture?
Yeah, oftentimes they're missing. We'll occasionally have a dad that will still be involved. We'll have grandparents that'll be involved, great
Yeah.
aunts that'll be
Yep.
involved. And we've had some success stories already with moms that have gone through treatment while they're here. We found housing for them while they're here. Their babies successfully gone through withdrawal while they're here. And rather than be homeless and lose another child, we found permanent housing for them and a place for them. One of our moms just got a job yesterday, was all excited and keeping in close touch with us. But over 80% of these babies will have, boys and girls will have serious mental health issues. Most of the boys will end up in the criminal justice system pretty early on. The great majority will experience homelessness. And so, when we look at what we see in society, I don't know what's going on in Des Moines, but in Spokane, we have a Camp Hope that had over 1,000 homeless in it this summer. I think it's down to about 400 during the middle of the winter, 400 or 500. But, it's not, you look at a lot of mental illness, you look at youth violence in schools, you look at the worsening opioid crisis, how it just keeps getting, I remember, you're probably too young for this, but I remember Nancy Reagan saying, just say no in the 80s.
Oh, no, I remember. Yep.
And then the opioids didn't hit until like 2008, that time frame. And then we have a pandemic in 2020, and then we have fentanyl. So it's just between the numbers and the drugs and the low cost of fentanyl and its prevalence on the streets, and that this thing is just exploding.
It's a perfect storm now, because you look at the next alcoholics, substance use, distress individuals, the ones that are going to be the next ones coming up behind us, Gen Z,
Right.
That's 10 to 24 years old. And, that's a third of the world's population. So you think about that, it's like 3 billion people. There's a number of, now, first of all, they're a fascinating generation. I've studied them quite a bit, because the project that we're doing for our new app is heavily geared towards Gen Z. So I had to know the generation real well before I could design an online mental health vehicle for them. But, they are the most depressed, the most anxious, the most uncertain generation ever. They're also the first generation ever to list mental health as the number one New Year's resolution. That bodes well. That means they understand that they need help. So, and they're searching for help. And so that's a statistic that kind of bodes well. But the problem is the way society's set up with social media, for example. It's extremely difficult for Gen Z kids to find meaning and purpose right now. And then you throw in substance abuse and unhealthy relationships with money, things like gambling. And we got to find a way as the adults in this equation to break these cycles, to get these kids either, not repeating it, so they're having children just generation after generation. So, there's a lot of this is not going to be on them. It's going to be on us to design the programs to, right this ship, so they can at least inherit a world that has better, treatment for them if they do go down some of these roads.
Right. Well, and you mentioned earlier, how'd you get into this? And there's a few reasons why I'm so excited to be doing what I'm doing. First of all, I'm not very good at golf. And secondly, my wife doesn't want me around the house all the time. And third, like you mentioned earlier on, it is just so much fun to learn and to meet new people and learn new things. I'm a lawyer, so most health professionals have forgotten more than I'll ever learn in the rest of my life. But it's just so much fun to learn. And now I see how complicated the healthcare system is, and that's a whole nother conversation. But then I think the fourth thing that kind of motivates me, well, actually five, but a fourth thing that really motivates me is I do feel some sense of responsibility. I'm the ultimate baby boomer, born in 1950. And, my group loosened a lot of forces in the 60s. And, with drugs and free sex and everything goes, and there's no such thing as truth. And you can't trust anybody, and all institutions are bad, and Vietnam and everything else, and racism and a lot of great things came out of it, whether you look at the women's movement and I think really civil rights gaining some momentum, although it's great to see it gain a lot more here in the last few years. And then the environment and a lot of wonderful things have come out of what we did. But I tell you, this drug problem, I think we added some real fire to it. So I feel a little responsibility there. And then I think the fifth reason is just I'm a person of faith. I happen to be a Christian. And I just think, I just look at the hands and feet of Jesus that are trying to help the least fortunate. And one of the things I'm reading The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire now to see what similarities there are with what we're seeing in America.
There's a lot.
Yeah, but one of the things that was great about the Christian community, which I think we need to learn something from, but right at the very, very, very beginning, the Romans, if they didn't like a baby because of the sex or disability or whatever, would put the baby outside the walls of the city to die, and the Christians would go and grab that child and raise that child, and that had a huge impact on that society and on that culture over time. And I really feel like, in some respects, in almost a metaphorical or analogous way, these little babies that are being born dependent on drugs, I don't think anybody should judge anybody from drug use. I think that's not helpful. As you well know, it's not really the solution. I'm not saying there's no accountability. There is a piece of accountability, but we judge way, way too quickly. We judge the moms, the dads, the young people, everybody, but nobody has the audacity to judge these babies. They're totally, totally innocent.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real power in helping these babies. I think a lot of these NAS babies, these babies being born dependent on drugs, are sort of being thrown outside the city walls. They're sort of our modern thing. And I think what we're trying to do in a very small way is just grab some of these babies one at a time and bring them back and try to change the trajectory of their life.
Well, I know you're from a state that is pretty liberal in a lot of this stuff.
Totally.
Harm reduction, things like that. What's your personal thoughts on our struggle we're having? Because I know I come from a state that's the opposite. We don't even have fentanyl test strips that are legal here yet. And harm reduction is like a very naughty word here in Iowa. So you go out to where you're from, and it's a different mindset. But I guess my question is, do you think it's working? Do you think, decriminalization, legalization, harm reduction, these things is the way we should be looking at this war on drugs? Or do we keep doing what we're doing in reference to the criminalization, the fact that things are not legal, and we don't have safe syringe areas around here in the Midwest? And it's like, I'm really interested in what your thoughts are on that, because you're like I said, you're in the war zone right there in your state.
Right. Well, I really, Jeff, need to be careful, because I'm not an expert. I'm learning rapidly.
I like your answer right there. So maybe not your opinion, but I guess, what are you observing in your own state?
I
maybe
think,
that.
And this could be totally from a position of ignorance. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's people that listen to this podcast that know way, 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 way more about this. And so I want to have a huge caveat. I generally think that criminalization, and I've I ran as a pretty conservative Republican in 2004, and my thinking has evolved a lot. I'm conservative in some areas, but much more liberal than I used to be in other areas. And this would be one of them, because I think criminalization has not helped. If you've got a young person that's gotten fentanyl on the street or something like that, we need to be focusing on the dealer and how that supply got there, more than the kid and who may overdose or takes fentanyl or get some sort of Mexies or some sort of colored drugs or pills or something like that. So I think where you have a hard and fast on one end that any possession is criminal, I think that's a problem. On the other hand, we have, we've legalized marijuana essentially in Washington and Oregon and California, Colorado, and many states. And, marijuana is harmful to these infants in utero. And we have I don't think we have much research and studies on the impact that it's having on these babies. I don't know how much science we're having on the impact that it's having on our young adults. I don't know how much research is being done on how this leads to the use of other drugs and the relationship there. So while I'm not saying we should criminalize all marijuana,
no, I understand.
But we there's just so much ignorance floating around, and we're throwing billions and billions downstream in the after these little babies' brains are pretty well set, in the first few years and the first few months are critical. And then we throw money down at mental health and we had one of our donors gave us $200,000, and he's the CEO of a medical company here in town called Excelsior Wellness, and they probably treat about 10,000 families, and they have detox facilities and they have treatment facilities, but they also have a school for kids that have been are tough to deal with and are having a tough time and have been kicked out of the public schools here in the Spokane region. I think, and I could be off on this, but I think they have about 200 children that they house and that they educate. And when he made this donation on behalf of Excelsior Wellness, he said, "Shaun, you've heard about the $1 million kid." And I said, "No, is this a kid that cost society $1 million over his lifetime?" He said, "No, we're dealing with kids that cost society $1 million a year, and you're talking about buying a facility for $1.5 million or something that's going to treat 100 of these babies a year, so that we don't have the $1 million kid per year downstream." So the criminal justice system, everything needs to be really looked at with a fresh start. And
I mean, having these conversations is what it's about, talking about it. I go back, and all we can do really is kind of look at our own lives and kind of take data from that and then extrapolate it to what we learn. I go back to our son, Seth. I mean, at the time I was going through it as a dad, really for the first time, because he was our oldest son, I was really kind of thrown into being perplexed about the drug. I've never done drugs in my life. Now, I was an alcoholic for 35 years, and a compulsive gambler, so I understand addictions quite well. But I never did the drug thing. And so I really struggled with trying to understand, why can't he, what's marijuana, what's the attraction to pot? I didn't get it. And he'd always say, "Well, it's legal here, Dad, legal there." And so, but as I got a little bit more into my advocacy and met people that were really into this deep, I would start to find out about the prefrontal cortex and about how it's not fully formed till, your mid-20s. And we're talking about kids that are 15, 16, 17, 18 that are smoking pot. What does that do to their brain? What does that do? And I think the evidence, I think you could find people that probably could argue and win cases on both sides of the fence there.
Right.
But I think the reality is that we need to, as a society, be real cognizant of not just is marijuana legal, but who's doing it. What are the ages of the users? And if it is predominantly in some of these states, the younger kids, they're getting it. If it's legal or not legal, they're going to find it. I don't think that
right.
that's not going to prohibit them from getting marijuana, whether it's legal or not. What is this doing to their brains?
Right.
And then you put in alcohol, which is a depressant.
Right.
It doesn't feel like it when you're drinking it because you get all excited, but then it hits you. It's like, what is this doing to their motivation? What is this doing to their desire? What is this doing to their purpose and meaning in life, their spirituality, their connection to the universe? I mean, is it just numbing it? Is it dumbing it? And I don't know. And that's, like you said, there's people watching this that, forget more in an hour than I'll know in my whole lifetime.
Right.
And I lean into that heavily. My being naive and being ignorant is actually a strength, because I'm open-minded.
I agree. I'm very open about it because it's very, very, very true. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm running into, Jeff, just as I am a lawyer, so that's a confession. And, after 40 years of evidence and doing things somewhat logically for clients and thinking in that way, it's been interesting. My ignorance, I think, has almost been a blessing, because I feel like with this one huge problem that we're dealing with babies that are born dependent on drugs, I feel like we've kind of flipped over this rock and we see all these cockroaches flying around with a light on it. And things just keep coming up from a public policy standpoint that I go, why are we doing this? I'll give you an example. So we have a methadone clinic here in Spokane. And so if you go into the methadone clinic, they're going to give you methadone.
Right.
And people go in daily. And we have pregnant moms that are going into the methadone clinic daily. And there's no disclosure that methadone can be harmful to these babies, that you can be born dependent on methadone also. And in some respects, from a clinical standpoint, I'm understanding that methadone can be very, very harmful to these babies. There's no disclosure to these moms. In fact, they're apparently positively being told when they ask that there is no negative impact. So And then you have the system. If they want to have more methadone, they can increase their dosage here in Spokane just by asking for it. But if they want to wean themselves from the methadone or lower their dosage, they have to see a physician and get a prescription for that to happen.
Okay.
Well, how many of them are going to do that?
Right.
So the whole system is ingrained towards these women that are pregnant, taking methadone. And if anything, increasing their dosage. We've had moms that have come in here that were taking the maximum amount of methadone at our local clinic, which is, 300 milligrams or something like that. I think you can go up to 330 milligrams a day or something like that. And they were also taking fentanyl on the street. So anyway, my point in blithering on about this is that we're just running it. I think we've got to do stuff from a scientific and an evidence-based standpoint and try to peel away as much emotion as we can from this, and as much judgmentalism and bias that we all bring to different subjects, and just go, okay, we've had this great experiment in our country with, legalizing drugs or whatever. Is that good or is it not? What's the research say? What does it do to brains that are forming, and what's it do to babies' brains and in utero? And yes, and I think that research is going to happen. One of the things I'm really excited about is we have two medical schools actually in Spokane. The University of Washington and Gonzaga are in partnership on one medical school, and then Washington State University has a relatively new medical school. It's less than 10 years old, and we are partnering with WSU Health Sciences, both their med school and their nursing school, and talking with some of their leaders. One of which a woman introduced me to Deborah, because Deborah she's a professor at WSU named Celestina Barbosa Leichner, who's been studying opioid, SUD, the whole thing with women and with gender. And so Celestina has been working with us and is going to do research. We hope to do research on what's happening here. And that's how I got introduced to Deborah and then to you.
I have two questions. What's the role of the government in all this, and where's the opioid settlement money going? Is it going into any of this area?
So I know Deborah is really focused on that, and she got me into it, and we've just started that. I know there's $54 billion that's sloshing around somewhere in the country that's supposed to be for mitigation and for treatment and for different programs in the different states. And then it goes down to the county level. And there's a tracker that you can go online and find out. But it is really difficult, at least for me, to kind of follow the money where that's going. So I
knew that was going to happen, though.
And I think we need, from a public policy standpoint, both state and federal, I think we need to have some transparency on where this money is going and whether it's being used for its intended purposes. On the public policy side, I'm really, really excited. And one of the, when I ran for Congress, there was a woman by the name of Kathy McMorris Rogers who beat me like a drum. And she's been in Congress for 18 years. She's a Republican, but she is now chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee as of last Tuesday. The Energy and Commerce Committee in the House of Representatives, interestingly enough, has oversight over NIH, the National Institute for Health, CDC, and CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And so she is really, really focused on this. And I've been talking with her for about 5 years. In 2018, we found out, because of Lily's Place in West Virginia, that there was a law called the CRIB Act. I don't know what the acronym stands for, but the CRIB Act. And it was in the Senate version of an $8 billion opioid package that Portman out of Ohio had gotten in. And then it wasn't in the House package, and it was in the conference committee. We had breakfast with Kathy. She went back and got the CRIB Act into the House bill. It was voted on again, and the president signed it into law. What's the CRIB Act do? The CRIB Act amended Medicaid to expressly cover the types of services we provide, neonatal abstinence syndrome services, by state licensed pediatric transitional care facilities. And I thought at that time, hooray, these services are going to be covered by Medicaid. And it took me 3 or 4 years to find out that while the feds pay 100 cents on the dollar for Medicare for the wealthy states like Washington, they only pay 50% of Medicaid. The other 50% has to come from the state. And so over the last year and a half, we've been dealing with our Washington State Healthcare Authority, which has taken the position that our state's state Medicaid plan does not expressly cover neonatal abstinence syndrome services, even though there's pages and pages that provide for coverage for chemical dependency withdrawal for youths. And last time I looked, somebody under a year old is a youth under 18.
Yeah, that's so odd that they could clarify it that way.
So we've gone to the state legislature, and our legislative session for the next biennium just started a week ago Monday. And we have 3 folks that are in pivotal positions in the state legislature, a guy named Andy Billig, who's our state Senate Majority Leader, who's following us closely, and then a guy named Marcus Riccelli, who's in the House, and he's head of a committee called Health and Wellness. Anyway, they're looking at, this has just happened this last week, of the possibility of Maddie's Place being a 4-year pilot project where we're given funding for the next 4 years of roughly $10 million that we would use to operate on. And then we would have a chance to prove our case that we should be permanently covered under the state Medicaid plan. I'm asking Kathy McMorris Rogers to come up with to help with a federal solution. And so we're working, because even if we get it covered here in Washington State, is a group like me and Tricia are going to have to do this in Iowa, or you and somebody else going to have to do it in Iowa? And the state by state patchwork that we're trying to do for a national opioid crisis with these babies is going to take 50 years at the rate we're going.
Yeah, you start looking at this opioid epidemic, and man, it seems like there's no end in sight. There's older people getting addicted to this stuff, especially the OxyContin, things like that, and then they try to get off it, have the withdrawals, and they find out that they can't get their prescription refilled, so they go to the next natural place, the doctors on the street, right? They go to the street, and we know how that's been going. So I guess another question I was going to ask you is, maybe for the people watching this, what's a typical day like at Maddie's Place? I mean, what give us an idea what happens day to day in there?
Right.
For someone who has no idea, is this a clinical place, or is this more of a place where there's peer-to-peer support? Or, I mean, kind of how does this work in regards to your day-to-day functions?
Right. Well, for anyone who's like really interested in seeing some detail to your question, our website actually has quite a bit of content on it. We have 3 to 4 minute videos that kind of answer that question and actually give a tour of the facility. And the website is just Maddie's Place, MADDIES, no apostrophe place, PLACE, one word.org. So Maddie's, and
I'll have that as a link on this podcast. But I've seen all those. I've seen it all. I've been on your site quite a bit. But for the person out there that really doesn't understand,
so basically the idea, and Trish was really influenced this. We wanted to have a facility that was not like an institution. It's not, it's very warm. Yep. The lighting is very warm.
Non-judgmental.
It's non-judgmental, very loving, lots of wonderful art and sayings on. It's a very, from the moment.
I have to think those moms are already in a bad place anyway when they come in there.
It sounds bizarre, but it's really a pretty happy place. We have 40 employees. We have 15 nurses. They've come from NIC units and that. They're really happy to be here. They love it here. They love the treatment that we're providing and the care that we're giving. So it has a really positive, it's a real positive home-like environment.
Right.
And actually where the magic happens is in a care center in the back of the facility that has almost like a large living room. And then it has 8 rooms that go off of this, almost like a hub and spoke. Mm-hmm. And so each room can handle 1 infant and one mom. But everybody congregates in this living space where there's couches and rockers and soft chairs, and it's pretty dimly lit and it's quiet, very soundproof. Because one of the things you're trying to do with these babies, their brains are overstimulated. Their brains are going so much, depending on the drugs they use, that bright lights, bright sounds, going outside, being put in a car doors, yelling, any kind of even in a NIC unit where you've got beepers going off and doors closing and coming and
Yeah.
going, and that is not really
What's
optimum.
the average age of a baby?
So the babies that are coming in to see us are anywhere between just a few days, 4 or 5 days after they've come out of the NIC unit in the hospital, to as many, probably as old as 3 months or so. Our license enables us to treat infants up to 1 year in age.
Oh, okay.
But we are seeing what happens. You have weird stuff that happens with these babies. For example, the the we're born with an instinct to be able to suck,
Mm-hmm.
and so a nipple, bottle,
Right.
breastfeed, whatever, that becomes volitional at about 3 to 4 months. It's no longer an instinct; it's volitional. And if their brains aren't straightened out and ordered by the time that it becomes volitional, the babies
Interesting.
out in the community don't know how to eat. So they come into pediatricians with all
Wow.
sorts of malnutrition issues, losing weight, gut issues, all sorts of things. And
Right.
it's simply because they weren't taught to suck during
Hmm.
the first few months. A lot of them are born with deformities in their mouth. They have tongue ties, all sorts of different funky
Hmm.
things. So we probably have 20 different nipples that are just identified for each single unique baby, and different formulas that are identified for each individual baby. We have a breast milk place that's down in Portland that'll overnight pasteurize,
Hmm.
screened milk with the right
Good.
caloric content to us. And so they gave us donated a refrigerator and that. But the place is very, very, very warm. I think the staff is, just exceptional. They're people that are highly trained as nurses, and our clinical director is our founder, Tricia Hughes. We have a medical director and a provider pool of doctors behind her. So it's just a really warm, friendly place. It's very non-judgmental. We also provide free room and board for the moms.
Good.
So we don't, and we're charging a payer that we have, Coordinated Care, is paying for our services. Although we've had to raise about $3 million locally to get this thing off the ground. But now we're being paid for our services. We're trying to change the state legislative law to kind of keep that going. But anyway, it's a great environment. The wraparound services include mental health counseling for the
Hmm.
moms. So we're partnering with someone, Excelsior Wellness, to do that. Uh, we have cooking classes. We have folks come in to cut the mom's hair. We have different social events around Christmas and Thanksgiving, and
You probably have a
so
lot of success stories.
we,
I mean, either moms that have straightened their life out, and
yep,
obviously the kids. Like Maddie's 14, you said, and she now starts
right.
to want to. So are there other Maddies in the system that have become kind of the pillar of how this thing can work in a good way?
Oh, well, I'm sure there are. I mean, other than I'm sure there are. I know that uh, Trisha also has a 22-year-old son who basically was born with severe fetal alcohol syndrome,
Yeah.
and so, but he's a wonderful, wonderful young man, and has been raised in a very, very loving home, which has made all the difference in the world. I mean, there's some things that happen, that are permanent that you can't change, but so yeah, I think there are a lot of success stories that are out there, even right here in Spokane.
Well, I think it's awesome what you're doing, and I think you know the more that these type of I have to guess you guys there's facilities like this. Maybe there aren't. I mean,
We're
is
the
it is
fourth in the country. There should be. The issue is,
see
Jeff.
that's
There should be.
crazy. I
There
just
should
thought
be
there'd be
four. There should be
400 of
four.
them.
There should be
Yeah, I
thousands
mean,
of these things. There's
wow.
only
I just
four.
assumed that there was four like in your state.
Well, we'll be able to. If we think if there's 1,000 NAS babies being born in Spokane alone,
Imagine.
we may treat 50 to 100 this year. So that's 5 to 10%. So
Hmm.
what we're hoping is, once we get everything fixed with the state, that we can start to replicate this model not only here in Spokane but elsewhere in the state and beyond.
That's great. It's all hands on deck. It's like, I'm spending time in the Gen Z area. I know there's a lot of people that work with recovery and rehab, the people that are maybe a little bit older. And now we got the babies on the other end, and it's like if we can come at this issue at simultaneously at all fronts,
Yep.
then we can start severing these cycles, these repeated situations where kids are born, they end up doing the same thing, and then they have kids, and they end up, and nothing really changes. It just creates more, just disconnection in society and more chaos and more misery. And it's really something that is preventable. I mean, that's the frustration. I mean,
Right.
it's certainly a lot of the issues we are having. We have to really look in the mirror and, take some accountability that we just haven't done a good job as, as a society to find constructive ways that we can get these things, fixed. And, um, who doesn't love a little baby? I mean, it just tears my heart out to think there's a 18-year-old child somewhere being out there on the street somewhere that, I didn't have that strikes against me. I grew up in the Leave It to Beaver house, and
Yeah, I did too.
yeah, so
Totally.
it's like I just can't even fathom. And my kids didn't have anything deprived. They were
Right.
spoiled like a lot of kids are.
Right.
And
Yep.
but then just by the birth lottery, boom, you're 18 days and you're on the street somewhere. It's like that kid is so innocent, and whatever we can do to help, and then make sure that not just save their life, but make sure they can, get the right things going. So when they get to be at that age of first use, that they're not using,
And I think when you hit it when you said it's all hands on deck. I mean,
right.
I can't imagine, Jeff, what you've gone through in the loss of a 23-year-old son, and I'm surely not arguing that we shouldn't have all the resources possible for all these different age groups
Right.
up to my age.
Right.
We really should. It's all hands on deck, and bless all the people around the country that have been working on these issues
Oh yeah.
for decades and decades and decades.
Tirelessly. Yep.
I'm a newbie, and I'm just kind of, but I do think we have this opportunity with these babies, and from a political standpoint, my I really feel, Jeff, and this is probably hyperbole, but anyway, let me throw it out there anyway, that that it's almost like D-Day, really. I don't think people really realize, what a serious threat this is to our country, what's happening. And, Rome fell from within by and large. Yeah, the barbarians were beating it on the outside, but
Yep.
it was pretty easy to push over the wall when it happened. And it, by and large, fell from the inside. And I think the risk to America is the same. So if you think of this as a national emergency, and we have the resources.
Oh, no
When
question.
I went to that, the feds cover 50% of the Medicaid costs in the state of Washington. We have 2.2 million out of our 8 million people that are on Medicaid in the state of Washington.
Hmm.
And during the COVID crisis, during the pandemic, the states got a 7% bump in that. So they got 57% of their Medicaid costs were covered by the feds. And then, of course, that got pulled back. And what I'm arguing with Kathy and with her position in energy and commerce, this is a strategic threat to the country. The pandemic was bad, and it was horrible, but it's come and gone. We don't have a vaccine or a mask or anything else for this opioid crisis.
Yeah, good
And so
point.
I'm asking for 1%, just
Right.
1% to go from 50% to 51% nationally. We could have thousands of these clinics, and we could help a lot of the. And if you help these babies, the other thing that happens is you start to help the moms, because we had a mom here, our first mom, who had a C-section the day that we opened on Monday, October 3rd. This was her fourth child. She's 39 years old. She lost the first three children to the state, to CPS. It was her fourth child. She's withdrawn. She's been using fentanyl, and her baby's withdrawing from fentanyl. Her social worker heard about us. That we're going to open. It told her about it. She wanted to come. So we went to pick her up on Wednesday, October 5th. And she told us, if you guys hadn't come pick me up, I would have been on the street tonight with my baby. So here's a woman who's 39 years old. She's already lost three children.
Wow.
And she's got her fourth child. So anyway, we of course brought her in. Her child went through 75 days of withdrawal treatment. We got her into outpatient treatment and drove her back and forth. She stayed with us. She successfully went through that, and we found her permanent housing during the 75 days she was here. And she got a job yesterday. So, we're trying to line up daycare for her now and stuff like that. But that's our first mom.
Wow.
So maybe that dyad, that mom and baby, and then if you can go out a little bit. So back to the D-Day thing, I just think I look at this little Maddie's place and Lily's place and what you're doing and what other people are doing. It's like we're getting a beachhead in
Yeah.
Normandy, and then
Yeah.
we're in. I'm like to think of the baby as the point of the spear because nobody has the audacity to judge these babies politically.
Right.
Democrats, Republicans, conservatives,
Yeah.
liberals. I don't care where you are on drug legalization. No, everybody looks at these babies. I bring people back there into that care center, guys that are tough and that, and they start bawling. People
Yeah.
just start crying when they see, how
I
can
can
we
only
do?
imagine. I
And
can only
so
imagine.
obviously that's wonderful to help the baby, but I think it's also an opening to soften people's hearts about this whole issue, not just the
Yeah.
babies, but your 23-year-old Seth
Yeah.
and all the other victims of this horrible thing that's happening to us. So anyway,
Well,
enough of the
I,
sermon, but
I think of my wife too passed away, and
right,
I think of the if the event doesn't happen, if our son doesn't die,
right.
there's a 99% probability my wife's still here.
Oh,
So
this,
his death just brought her down too. So it
oh,
actually amounted in two deaths. And then, you know, if I wasn't in a position where I'm in with my, ability to reframe and kind of, things that I've done that worked for me, it could have brought me down as well. I mean, I had a very scary incident last Christmas, not this Christmas, but the one before, where I would say is my first brush with suicidal ideation. So
yep.
I
Oh,
almost left too. And it's like, so you would think that one choice my son made on that day and all the preceding choices, because he probably dodged bullets, for years. He just happened to, he wasn't
right,
a heroin addict. He'd only been trying for like a week, but the other stuff he was doing,
right,
cocaine could have had fentanyl,
right,
but it's like, when that event happened, just the Pandora's box, just the collateral damage, just the ripple effect, and to
oh,
this moment, he has a daughter, she's 6, her name's Brighton, and it's like that ripple's still going to go now through her whole life. That one
right,
decision he made at that moment just to get high, he wasn't trying to die, and that's one family, on one street in one town in one state in one country.
right,
And
right.
this is a big problem. We better start addressing this addiction problem in this country because there is no end in sight, and the end in sight is bad.
Yeah,
You
it really
know,
is. And it's just, well, I admire you so much, Jeff, for how you've been able to turn this horrific situation with both your son and your wife into such a positive force to try to impact and have in their name, I'm sure,
oh yeah,
to to really rescue a lot of people. A lot of people obviously are going to hear what you have to say at different events and different venues and all the stuff you're doing on mental health and everything. And so I just really uh, have such great respect for what you're doing with your life. And Lord knows that there, but for the grace of God. I mean, I did use drugs in the 60s and the early 70s, and
mm-hmm.
it's just a miracle that I happened to get through it. And I was
Right,
totally born spoiled. My dad was a lawyer. We had everything we needed in that,
mm-hmm.
and I still was a screw up. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just by the grace of God that kind of I made it through my own issues, which we all have. And so, but anyway, it's just so cool to be able to identify something and try to say, hey, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and
Mm-hmm.
play a little bit less golf and try to make a difference for each one of these babies and hopefully for some of their moms and work with really wonderful people like you and Deborah and
Yeah,
Celestina and maybe push some public policy to kind of get a few more dollars that are strategic. Not just I'm not talking about throwing money. I'm
right.
talking about that. I'm talking about trying to do something about that $1 million a year kid for
Yeah,
society where we don't spend $1 million a year on that kid.
yeah. I've got this mindset in me that I picked all these roads to go down after all this happened. It's like I could have been that fentanyl dad, out there protesting fentanyl. I could be an alcohol awareness husband out there talking about alcohol abuse. But as I started going down this, I started thinking to myself, it there is no downside to collaboration on any level. So I could be talking to any advocate that's trying to save lives, and somewhere along the line, we're connected. You
Yeah.
know, if it's a baby, well, play it back far enough, you're going to find a mom that probably was an alcoholic that got into
Right.
drugs that next
Totally.
thing you know, she had a child. So I mean, there's a pattern here that I think someone could say, well, Jeff, why are you collaborating with somebody who's working with, babies? And I'm like, why not? It's like, this is the opportunity we have as advocates, is that we can work with anybody we want to work with. And so I'm just happy our paths crossed. I'd love to see Maddie's place some point, or
Well, you will, I'm sure.
when I'm in the
We
area,
we need to have one in Des Moines too, So
I can do it in Cedar Rapids as
yeah,
well. I mean,
no, that who knows? Yep.
we can certainly do some work together at some level. But how do people reach you? What's the easiest way to contact you if people watch this and want to learn more?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm happy to have people call me on my cell phone. Tell you the truth. So it's area code 509, and my number is 496-3753. Another way is just Shaun, Shaun .cross, CROSS, like cross your heart, Shaun.cross at maddiesplace.org. And further information is on our website, maddiesplace.org too. So
Listen, it's been a
thank you so
pleasure
much.
and an honor, man. I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to having this post and get the feedback from people. But in the meantime, I know I'll be reaching out with you some other areas that we'll talk about. So
Okay, sounds good.
thanks for your time, man. I really,
Yeah.
really admire what you're doing.
Oh, well, likewise, Jeff. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
All right, man. Keep living undeterred.